Now, I've had a few guys ask me about the immortal question of whether or not you can actually get into trouble for approaching girls during the daytime. And I guess I felt that I had to throw in my 2 pennies worth, since after all, I am a lawyer, and indeed I spent at least 15 years as a criminal lawyer representing suspects in the police stations in London, southeast London mostly, and I come across prosecutions for what's called Section 5 Public Order Act offence. So I guess I'm a little bit of a mini authority on the law in this area. Obviously, the latest controversy was actually, conflagrated by a BBC documentary that went undercover, subversively, covertly videoing people entirely without their permission and then slapping their faces all over national television in order to appeal to the prejudices of the great white British and English and particularly Scottish, and I imagine in Glasgow they probably are mostly white, population. So, okay, you'll know the controversy. Google it. Addy A Game and Street Attraction got into a little bit of trouble. Well, Addy A Game got into quite a lot of trouble actually. He was convicted of 5 separate Section 38, which is kind of the Scottish equivalent of Section 5, I'll come on to the law in a minute, offences, having been charged with 13 actually. I think probably one of which was a sexual assault. They tried to get him with a lot more than they actually got him with. So he's actually been on remand, and he's still on remand. He's been 18 months in prison, poor sod. And which is quite a heavy sentence for an offence of this nature. So let me just first of all outline the law of the land and pose the question of the day, the Pytania du jour, to mix Polish with French, which is, can I get in trouble for approaching girls during the daytime? Can I be prosecuted? Can I be a victim of a criminal prosecution in England and Wales? And there's enough overlap as regards Scotland to make it a sort of a British question, because the 2 offences in the 2 different legal jurisdictions are pretty much similar or even the same. So government in their wisdom in the 80s enacted a bit of legislation in England and Wales. Scotland followed suit a bit later with what was called a Public Order Act. I mean, that's quite a heavy-duty act. It was meant to deal with things like rioting and aggressive behaviour in the streets with gangs of youths who were putting the Joe public in fear of violence. And that was a Public Order Act. But they managed to snuck in there a little section called Section 5, which was basically, if you use threatening or abusive behaviour towards someone that is likely to cause others distress or alarm, it's kind of like an objective test. Nobody actually has to be put into a condition of alarm or distress, but it's likely to have that impact. And you're pretty reckless and careless about whether or not it does have that impact, then you fall foul of this criminal offence. And you can be, and indeed there are many tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of prosecutions for Section 5. Now, what's so interesting about this little bit of legislation is that it borders on criminalising basically antisocial behaviour. Now, philosophically, as a lawyer, I want the law to be pretty clean, criminal law especially, where it comes to offences. So if someone intentionally hurts someone, then that's clearly an offence, isn't it? Or even indeed seriously threaten someone with violence that puts them in fear of immediate violence, that's clearly an assault. And unfortunately, this little legislative nugget means that you can be convicted of an offence just basically from mouthing off in anger and frustration in a public place. It's difficult to make out in a private place. It's more of a, as I say, it falls under the Public Order Act. Now, what has happened is, and this is why philosophically I'm against this sort of offence, is that the police, bless them, you know, when they can't get someone for anything else, like a sensible criminal offence, they basically roll out a Section 5. So if you were to research the case law on this, you'd discover, you know, that some hoodlum had been arrested by the coppers and he's mouthing off, calling you fucking bastards, you bastard pigs. And the police officers roll their eyes at the back of their heads and they say, look, get in the van and shut up. And then he carries on abusing them, and they roll their eyes even further into the back of their heads and they say, if you swear at us one more time in this aggressive way, we're going to nick you, mate. And he's like, nick me for what? And then he says, you fucking pigs. Nick me for what, you fucking pigs? And right, Section 5, you are now under arrest. You know, cuff him, put him in the back of the van, take him to the nick, basically spend a lot of police resource on then processing him, booking him in with a custody sergeant, having a detective take him into an interview room, getting a legal representative, a lawyer basically out to the police station, keeping him in a police cell, and then subjecting him to an interview, and after which the custody sergeant would decide whether or not there's sufficient evidence to charge him, and then bringing a prosecution. I mean, that's a lot of paperwork. That's a hell of an admin headache. And I think I saw some stats that for a year in early 2000, like 80,000 of these offences that people were arrested for, perhaps, I'm not quite sure whether charged or prosecuted for, which is a huge amount of police resource when you think about it. Purely because, you know, the coppers couldn't they? And it's such sort of encourages sloppy policing in my view, because it puts all these resources into prosecuting minor offences when really police resources should be dedicated towards the more serious offences. Makes it easier for police community support officers, any part-time police officers to get a little bit of conviction. The police have targets, so you know they can get a number, they can hit their arrest targets and so on and so forth. Now, let me just take a look at this particular incident with Mr. Addy A Game. So he was arrested for a bunch of offences, as I say, but it was ultimately only convicted for the Scottish equivalent of Section 5, which is Section 38 of a piece of legislation whose name I won't bore you with, that says pretty much a similar thing. Threatening, abusive behaviour likely to cause people alarm or distress. Okay, it doesn't have to cause anybody alarm or distress, and indeed, in the case of police officers, you really do wonder whether it would cause them any alarm or distress, but that's not the point. It's a public place, there might be bystanders who hear or see what's going on and feel threatened and alarmed and distressed. Okay, so now, what is the interesting thing here is, and this is a really important note, is that we don't know, exactly what did go on during that trial. There were 5 witnesses. There were a bunch of reports, of course, who've reported on what took place during the trial, but we weren't the jury, we weren't the barristers, we weren't attending the trial itself, so we don't actually know how serious the offence was. Now, it seems that evidence was given in the case of one girl that he kind of grabbed her, pulled her in, tried to kiss her. Perhaps in the case of another girl, he made some sexual remarks and was quite aggressive. Now, you don't have to watch 2 minutes of an Addy A Game video to realise that, he comes across as a bit of a dick. He does come across as a bit of an aggressive swaggerer who pushes the envelope, and that would not be my bag. He's out to get laid. He's a self-confessed serial seducer, and you know, but you know, that being said, is it really worthy of a criminal prosecution, that kind of conduct? But clearly, as is often the case, a policy decision has been made at a certain level at the police station as a result of media pressure, unfortunately. The police are very conscious of their image in the media, I'm afraid, has led to this prosecution, and they've found a little bit of a scapegoat. Now, the thing to say about Addy A Game is that he has got criminal convictions. He's known to the police, as well as being an aggressive serial seducer. Unfortunately, you know, his colour probably doesn't help him here. Blacks and certainly Pakistanis are not popular in Glasgow, I understand. And you know, unfortunately, he presents in perhaps the worst possible way you can imagine, should someone want to you know, paint him as a social threat. So we don't quite know the degree of the degree to which he was, you know, particularly aggressive in his approaches to girls. I mean, there's no question that he's successful in seduction, I think, on balance. So, you know, that's a big kind of caveat to any kind of conclusions that you might draw in terms of your own interest in daytime approach. I think the more concerning thing for me, in fact, and in a way this is this was what's the word, the fire that was fanned into flames by the spark that was fanned into flames by the media, is the covert videoing and covert recording. And you know, I have to say, secretly videoing a girl after sex, and he denies, I should say, that that she didn't consent to this, although it seems surprising, frankly, but he denies it. It seems a little bit creepy to be uploading a video you've taken of a girl after sex and you've not told her and you've not got her consent. That is a little bit odd. But bizarrely, they couldn't get him for anything relating to that conduct, and there is not really any sort of legislation that has sufficient teeth. You're talking about obscene publications, Obscene Communications Act, I think it is, but really this simply doesn't fall into that category. If anything, it is simply an invasion of privacy, and an invasion of privacy for those YouTubers out there can't occur in a public place. Yeah, there is no invasion of privacy in a public place. But if it's in a private location where there's an expectation of privacy, then you can fall foul of this civil offence, not criminal, but civil offence. So, if this girl, or however many girls it is she's alleged to have videoed and recorded having sex with, were to bring a civil prosecution, they might well succeed and get some form of financial compensation for him. But it wouldn't, you know, hurt him criminally, and it would probably, I mean, if that girl came to me and said, look, I want to sue this Addy A Game for invasion of privacy, I'd probably say to her, you know what, love, sure, it's going to cost you money to bring a civil prosecution, to bring civil proceedings, and I'm not sure just how much loss you've really suffered. And if you were a member of the royal family, then that might be different. So, interestingly, the law isn't at all that available really to, in a criminal sense, certainly to society, in order to go after people for that, for what I consider to be not, you know, a creepier kind of thing to be, for a guy to be doing, quite frankly. And now let's be honest, both Addy A Game and Street Attraction have in many ways played with fire. I mean, in order to generate the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of hits that they get on their YouTube channels, in order to successfully penetrate the marketplace, they have, to make a successful business out of what it is that they're doing, which is probably pretty innocent. They have had to sort of drive to the edges in terms of providing video and audio footage of having sex with girls or taking girls back to the bedroom. So, in a way, I won't quite go so far as to say they've got it coming, but it's certainly a case of playing with fire insofar as your business model, is concerned, I think. In terms of street attraction, I thought it was quite funny. I watched the BBC Panorama documentary this weekend, and I laughed at the end when the BBC put a trailer right at the end of the documentary saying, if you have been the victim of sexual or any other illegal abuse or threatening behaviour, then contact this helpline. There are people here to help you. If you've been approached by a guy in the street who's paid you a compliment and made you feel slightly nervous, then please call this helpline. Talk about treating girls like they are some sort of vulnerable sector of society who can't look after themselves. An adult girl should be able to, and frequently does, say, no mate, bugger off, I'm not interested. And in those instances, as far as I understand, anybody, whether from Street Attraction or Addy A Game himself, would say, sure love. Although, as I say, I just don't know how aggressive Addy A Game has been in terms of his street approaches. I think, to attempt to answer this question, am I likely to get in trouble if I approach girls in the street? I think, it's got to be no. In the future, legislation could be enacted to make it an offence if a girl feels slightly nervous. But the case law is reasonably clear. It's causing someone distress or alarm. It is actually threatening and abusive. And now, you've got to ask yourself, have you ever been in a situation in the street or in any other, or bar, or coffee shop, or a shopping centre, where you've been abusive and threatening? Okay, and there's been a likelihood of genuine distress and alarm. I mean, that's a quite high threshold, and certainly as a defence lawyer, I would love to represent a client who had just simply been quite sort of, what's the word, policeman-like, or traffic policeman-like. Could I just say, I just had to come over and I wanted to tell you that I think you look really nice. And when the girl goes, oh, thank you very much, but I'm really busy, that the guy then goes, well, can I just say one more thing? And he leans in and says, so blah 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 blah. I'm guessing you're here shopping. You've got some shopping bags, and let's say she's sat down with a coffee, minding her own business, and doesn't want to be interrupted. For that to cross the threshold into a Section 5 criminal offence or Section 38 in Scotland seems to me extremely unlikely. And as I say, as a lawyer, I would love to handle that kind of defence as the law, currently stands. And if the law changes, then God save us all. We've just all got to emigrate to sensible countries, haven't we? I think you've got to Addy A Game has been pilloried because he's a pretty easy target. He's already got criminal convictions. He's got into trouble with the police before. He's particularly, it would seem, aggressive, certainly assertive, at least one can say, perhaps even physically assertive when it comes to approaching girls and getting telephone numbers. And moreover, he is putting some pretty kind of questionable product out there in terms of videoing girls secretly by audio and video when they're having sex. And I think I don't know how much of the faces that he blanked out when he was videoing a girl in his bedroom, but I don't think he kind of fully, hazed out the girl's face and so on and so forth. So, you know, if you tick any of those boxes, yeah, you know, you've got a YouTube channel and you covertly video and record girls in a private location while you're having sex with them. If you are quite an assertive / aggressive guy when it comes to approaching complete strangers, if you have criminal convictions and you know you're kind of living slightly on the edge of the law in the first place, then yeah, maybe I would look out, and you might get in trouble for approaching girls in the street. But that's you know, it's got to be very unique to the 1% of guys who do this sort of stuff who are going to fall foul. You know, at the end of the day, whether it's in a bar, a coffee shop, a shopping centre, a street, you know, to start to criminalise approaching girls, and of course men are meant to take the initiative when approaching girls, is an extremely kind of radical step, and it would absolutely inundate the police with unnecessary prosecutions and unnecessary administrative headaches. And I just can't see that happening. Now, doesn't stop the press making an example of a pickup artist who does push the envelope, like Addy A Game and Street Attraction, yeah, plugging the Git Laid, pumping out the videos. And I have to say that I thought Eddie from Street Attraction handled the ambush by the BBC Panorama documentary producer and his cameraman on Oxford Street. I thought he handled it very well, until that point where they started to question him about making secret video footage of girls without their consent. And I think that is slightly distasteful, and yet, but nevertheless, unfortunately, you can see why these guys are doing it, because it's very difficult to make a business out of it. Well, I mean, I'm sure you could. Certainly, it is one way of generating clients and reaching the client base that a company like Street Attraction has to reach if it's going to survive. So it's a bit of a heavy kind of a vlog. I guess if you guys had asked me about it, I thought I'd better drill into it and have a look at it from the legal perspective. I do wonder to what extent the coppers who were involved in the Scottish arrest and the Scottish trial against Addy A Game were committed to the cause. Certainly, you know, the communications officer at the local police station probably sat up and took a look, and the BBC Panorama team obviously put a lot of pressure on them to pursue these proceedings. But I did read one blog that said that when it was first raised, I think by BBC, the police said, well, fine, but he hasn't committed an offence. So I think quite a lot of work was done by the police and by the prosecution to try and figure out how they could make these charges fly and secure convictions. And as I say, at the end of the day, they only secured 5 convictions, all for this very watery Section 5 / Section 38 of the Public Order Act, or in Scotland it's called breach of the peace type offence. Just finally, I was in a police station in South East London on the Woolworth Road over 10 years ago now, defending a suspect. He'd been in the job centre, as they were then called, asking for a crisis loan. He was black, he was 50, he was well built, and he mouthed off against the girl behind the glass at the job centre, and the police notebook that I had to go through as part of taking my client's instructions and looking at the evidence. The quote that the police officers had plucked out was, "You white tanned bitch standing in your gold." I'll never forget that rather bizarre expression, but apparently it was uttered in the job centre. This chap got frustrated with the because they wouldn't give him a crisis loan, and the point was that he mouthed off. It was threatening, well, it was certainly abusive, probably not threatening, but abusive behaviour, and it was in a public place full of grannies and mothers and so on who were likely to be cause distress, okay, or alarm. So that was my experience. I think the police officers were called the police officers. There was one DD detective, constable, who wanted to make a point of pursuing a Section 5 offence, but as I recall, custody sergeant rolled his eyes into the back of his head and, oh, another Section 5, you know. And my client was like mystified. He couldn't understand why swearing was a criminal offence. As I recall, I think they let it go. They didn't push it through. When you get to the cold face, you know, as often as not, the police, you know, take a common sense view. The problem is, of course, where you get intense media pressure and they're forced to find a scapegoat, someone to put in the pillories in order that rotten fruit and vegetables can be thrown at them, or in this case banged up for 18 months in some godforsaken corner of the Scottish prison system. Okay dudes, that's all for now. Do widzenia. Buy my books, you bastards. You thought you were going to get away without a plug.